Hello, hi everyone, and welcome again to the API Governance for Scale podcast. It's me, Ikenna Wiwu. I am principal consultant at Ikenna Consulting. I'm an independent consultant, and I help engineering leaders. I give them independent, evidence-based assessments of their API governance and delivery posture. Today, I have with me Miguel Quintero. How are you, Miguel?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. Thank you a lot for
Good to
having me.
have
It's a
you.
pleasure.
Good. Miguel, today we're going to be talking about a story you told me about API governance, in a large enterprise, and starting with things like an API governance center of excellence.
Yep.
But before we go into all those API governance stories, Miguel, tell us a bit about yourself and a bit of your story, how you got in tech and how you got into API governance.
Cool. Well, thank you. Anyway, thanks for the intro. Thanks for having me here. It's awesome just to be able to hang out and talk to different, folks in the API community. So my name is Miguel Quintero. I am ex-HP, ex-Delta, ex-Postman. I've been around for 20 plus years in tech. My background basically software development, software engineering. You start out your career and support and just in tech. And so throughout that my career, essentially, when I was told, hey, let's do DevOps, let's do all these different trends that come along. And so, okay, fine, get into that. And so I found myself in it's known today, back then, as a developer experience team, being, supporting teams worldwide. So so I started getting more involved, and that's where I started to get a sense of governance, like you're gluing different tools, you're putting different processes and tools together. You start noticing lots of inconsistencies. And so I did that for many years. And then, of course, once you're doing that, and of course, along the way, I did some DevOps work, DevSecOps work. And well, along the way, you come across APIs. And that's where I would say, that's where the governance really hit me, because it was such an initial bad experience. It was fun. I mean, learning is fun, right? That part is fine. But you're trying to come up with, you probably know, right? You folks know a lot of integrations and different standards and different ways of doing things. And I'm like, okay, this is an amazing space. So let's focus on APIs. So this is around 2014, 2015 timeframe. So ever since, I started working in API, what's API first? That's really in any project. Where's the API? Well, let's build one. Why don't we have one? And of course, I've also got to know more people, and then got invited to join the OpenAPI community. So I've been contributing to that project, which is very good, great experience, meeting a lot of people over there, attending conferences, doing a few talks here and there, mainly maybe API days, and then some internal talks at Delta as well. So yeah, I do have, like you said in your intro, right? I do have a lot of governance scars, lots of them.
Well, and one of the things that struck me when I spoke to you is, again, one of those stories about API centers of excellence. And
Yeah.
as many people who are listening would know, when introducing governance, it makes sense to have some sort of central enablement group. It can be called an API center of excellence. It can be called something else, an API governance group. Whatever it's called, is this kind of central group that's meant to enable teams in terms of providing them with standards, helping them with maybe some of the tooling, just helping them answer some of the questions and really oversee the initiative, really. Tell us a bit about how you've in different companies you've worked in, you've been involved in. Tell us about your experience with the early days of API centers of excellence. Let's set up
Sure.
this group, let's help teams. Tell us stories of how that started and how that started out. I'm sure in those days, it's exciting to get into all that. What's been your experience with starting out an API COV?
Great question. So basically, most of my career is spent in the enterprise. So we're talking about large organizations worldwide, and that also means enterprise. So it's bigger lots of lots of people, and inherently, as I discovered, lots of silos, right, everywhere. And so when I was at HP, we're like, okay, we got a ton of APIs, right? I'm starting digging, exploring. Okay, where do we have a catalog? We have a portal. What are our assets? How are people connecting all these interfaces, et cetera? And they're out there, but essentially not much of a driver there. I try to reach out to people, try to look for other folks who cared about the same subject. Not much there. And so basically I ended up, that's why I ended up in Delta, right? So they actually started out with Center of Excellence. It's a lot of hard work. It was really tough, very quick go to market, experience, it's go, 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 you're competing a lot. So when I got there, there was a team. I came in as a designer, and very little tooling in place, right? So, but that's okay. You need to get started. Like when I was there before, there was basically nothing. It's just sporadic, spread out pockets of people trying to do the right thing, and they don't talk to each other. Maybe they do, they don't. But I thought that was different, right? It was more formal. I said, okay, great. This is fun. This is what I'm looking for. Everyone's going in the same direction, and let's go. And so our rest style guide, about 22 pages, very modest, right? But back then, by the time
Did you
I
say
arrived, I'd seen it.
22 pages? Sorry, did you say
Yeah.
22 pages? Yeah.
Yeah, it's very small. It's a small PDF, because that's one of the first things I did. I said, okay, what is that good by the time I arrived, I had seen many guides out there. I mean, this is back in mid-teens. People were trying to come up with these style guide. And I was learning a lot back then from like Mike Adamson, API Handyman, and Loren. He was collecting a lot of the information. So I was just basically learning from those, I call them my mentors back in the day. And so I've seen a lot of style guides, and I got a sense of how different organizations were working on their APIs. I said, great. Okay, we have one. That's good. A good step. Yeah, I looked at our developer portal. Great. Okay, so we've got your initial tooling that I would say maybe many of these teams start out with these. So, okay, you got your portal, you got your standards, and then you start your working way from there, right? This is in place, engagement. We had a form, a document you had to fill in, your intent, what you're trying to do, architecture, information about your API, etc. And send that across. We take a look, and then of course we assign someone to work with that team. Maybe, I don't know if you can call that the classic model, like a central team where we're just receiving those requests. Back then in sort of an informal way with no ticketing system or anything of that form. We just want to just get started, right? So yeah, and then I started just spreading out, talking to more teams and more teams and more engagements and engagements and engagements. And yeah, it was
Yeah.
actually, for me, it was quite fun. I mean, you learn a lot about different domains, different parts of the organization, which is really, really awesome, because then ultimately that helps you understand, okay, where the APIs are coming from, who's going to
Yeah.
talk to what. You get to step back and see, okay, is our sort of catalog our assets taking the right shape, so on and so forth. So yeah.
Yeah. One interesting thing you mentioned there, Miguel, is this. We always have this classic tension between speed. At that company, there was a lot of pressure to deliver. There was market pressure to get something out. But they also, at the other hand, you're kind of the governance person who's meant to, ensure
Yeah.
standards and consistency and, all that good stuff with APIs. And, there's a whole story there to be told about. There are lots of stories there, I guess, on that tension between speed and quality,
Yeah.
reliability, all that standard stuff. Um, and one of the things you told me was this idea of champions, finding people as you
Yeah.
walk across different teams, finding people to champion that governance. Now, this is a common pattern, when people roll out, when people are in the enterprise adopting not just APIs, but, testing or technologies or whatever,
Sure.
you have people champion it. But particularly at APIs, in your experience, tell us more about your experience with kind of rolling out your COE with API champions and kind of enabling champions, supporting champions. How did that go? Did that work well? Did you have problems? What kind of problems did you face with getting API champions to support you?
Yeah. So basically, yeah. So early days, as I met more people, you get more engagements, and you're meeting more folks, you're meeting more API teams. You start getting a sense of some people sort of tend to stand out. So for example, I'm looking for people who maybe are very passionate about standards, right? So in fact, let's just say consistency, not just at APIs, but consistency across the board. But of course, we care about APIs, so it's, be consistent about API. And and also worry about, say, some of the op metrics, the onboarding. Who's consuming my API? That question, who's consuming my APIs in my team, and so on and so forth, right? And so that's the kind of person so we're in our day-to-day engagement, and we're looking at a design, we're looking at API to go, okay, they're gravitating towards those concerns that I say, okay, I think we have a potential champion here, someone who maybe who can also influence their team. That's also very, very key. Yeah, you can influence their team, you can influence your domain, who goes beyond, okay, here's an integration point, and that's it. We're done with this API, right? Goes beyond that. What makes this difficult is if you're talking to that person, but they only consume APIs within their own team, within their own org, it makes it really, really hard. They don't not think outside the box, if you will, right? But when they do, like, okay, one domain is consuming APIs from another domain, let's say private APIs, for example, then yeah, they start, as you know, they start getting concerned about, okay, the onboarding experience, the developer experience, and now the agentic experience. You're going to consume my agent, whatever, what's behind the agents and all that. So now those concerns come to the picture and go, okay, I think this is a person who can make a good champion. Not only that, but it's also the persona. I started out obviously talking to developers, and I'm thinking, well, what if those concerns about, let's say, business capabilities? Developers don't. So they're just coding, want to code, they want to develop their controllers and whatever. They're not necessarily thinking, hey, what's the business capability here? How's the end consumer going to use it, or the actual customer all the way out here? The customer is going to use this product, which in turn uses my APIs. How does that all translate? So business analysts, right? I'm reaching out to business analysts, that kind of persona, and I'm going, hey, this is, you're in an API team, you're building this product, etc. Have you thought about all these things? And that, oh yeah, I'm thinking about it. But then you have the flip side problem if we go, oh, but I'm not a developer. I'm not should be care about it. No, yeah, you do. You
Yeah.
do. So I'm trying to look for the well-rounded person, the developer who should understand some of the business capabilities and aspects. And on the other side, the business analyst who understands that and has a big picture, maybe the product person, product focused person who needs to also understand how APIs work. So
Yeah.
that's the kind of mix, that's the kind of person I'm looking forward to. And I did find
Yeah.
a few. I did find a few a champion, but it's hard. It's just more work you have to do, but I think it's well worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, very interesting point you raise. There are 2 points you raise I want to talk about. One is this thing about the business analyst, and then the second point about come back to that. But for the business, we talk a lot about API first and API as a product and API first. And I think as a consequence of that, when that starts getting embedded and teams begin to understand, look at things from that business capability, then
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. It's my experience that the business analysts, kind of people, product owners, kind of level people become really interested in APIs and in the design. And I guess that's where tools like they depend on what tooling they use, but they really get interested in that design because they're seeing that interface, seeing it from a customer journey perspective, seeing those touch points between systems, and they're really seeing it from a kind of capability perspective, right? From a
Correct.
business operation perspective. So that's I think that's a really really interesting point in terms of people who buy into that kind of API first. But then the other thing as well you said I thought was really interesting is about I'm not going to call them silos, but industries that are not necessarily, we're not talking about the digital people providing digital services. So as a product, so if we think of traditional industries in
Right.
logistics or transportation or things like that, where you really have different departments and really different orgs.
Yep.
API governance kind of really comes into its own when people actually consume or try to consume APIs across different
Yep.
business units, right? And that's where
Yep.
I think that's what you're talking about, where you have, if it's all
Yep.
within one team, once one small team, then it's like, okay, why the bother? But once it's across different domains and even across different business units, it really comes into people then see the need for that consistency. Yeah, maybe you can share a bit more about your experience there and this kind of cross team, cross business unit.
Well, yeah. So yeah, when that happen, when you cross that boundary, I mean, you definitely then you're going beyond API design, right? And so you're gonna have to have that conversation, because that's the other thing. Sometimes the folks might the perception is, oh, this is a governance team, they only do API standards, but which might be the case, but I think this center of excellence should evolve more towards, the even what I call ROI readiness, be able to, if someone comes to you, C-level or some general manager, say, hey, explain the return on investment on why we're building this API. So you got to be ready for that. Maybe in some of your other questions, we'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, I mean, when you cross that boundary, definitely the government comes into the picture. But you know what's interesting? And I ran into this a few times where I talk about this concept that you're mentioning to teams who are building internal APIs, right? APIs. And I go, one day, maybe that API you've built is so successful that it gets consumed outside of your team, outside of your org. Guess what? Maybe even evolves, if that's maybe the right word, do a partner API. Now we're talking a much bigger problem here. And I go, you have to perhaps start with that mindset and say, okay, one day, the interfaces that I'm writing were internal only and have so much concern. And then when become partner APIs, that's a different, you might even, most likely probably design a separate API, but you take your learning, you take that learning and then you translate that to a partner API, because now you're a team that went from writing internal APIs to possibly partner APIs. And so that you're definitely crossing a lot of boundaries there. So, you better be ready. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm talking about partner APIs. What we find is, organizations have lots of internal APIs. Some organizations have customer APIs, but lots of organizations integrate with third parties, partners, suppliers, those kind of things. And that is a layer that also needs governance, right? That's a layer that involves integration, some level of visibility on who we're integrating with, perhaps some, security concerns there. What has been your experience with that third party side of connecting with, with third party vendors over APIs? Yeah.
Yeah, that was for me. I've worked with a few partners, and it was tough because, let's say, for example, you have the tooling, they don't. So how do you collaborate? Let's just talk tooling alone. Where's the platform to collaborate? Worst case scenario, you put a contract out there and you start emailing it to each other, or Dropbox or Google Drive. You start using this very ad hoc, and maybe some maybe security concerns there when you're, sharing this intellectual property back and forth, right? So you have to have the right platform to do so, right? Though once you get past that, then you're like, oh, then it's maybe this partner has a set of governance and you have your own set of governance, you have your own set of standards, they have their own set of standards. Is how do you bring those together? Right. Their architect, your designer, their designers. A lot of times, if I remember, I never worked with outside designers. It's just basically the partner assigned one or two developers to the project. And these developers, to be honest, a lot of developers that I've met, they're very brilliant. They know what they're doing, etc. But the subtleties of API design are not something that, they brought to the table often when I met them. They're brilliant people anyway. But so it was like, okay, you'd have to get into some education there and then translate these requirements into business outcomes and sort of make sure the API evolves in the right way. And so developers, they just focus on the sort of the tech aspect of it, frameworks and language and whatnot. So I had to deal with a lot of that and say, okay, this is our standards. You're going to be the consuming partner. You're going to build it. We're going to consume it. Okay. So our models, etc. How does that, naming conventions and whatnot, or schemas and all of that, how does that supposed to work? And a lot of times, if you're lucky, maybe they say, okay, we'll follow your standards. Go, we have none. I was brought into this project. We have none. So we'll do what you say so we can smooth things out. And mind you, these integrations and this whole process took weeks and weeks and weeks and
Yeah.
weeks. It just uh, wasn't as pleasant, but it was good.
Yeah.
Learning is good, but as DX wasn't as good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Can imagine on the partner side, yeah, that third party side, not, yeah, it's the DX not as good as customer facing APIs. So we have this center of excellence. You get started. You've introduced API champions as an organizational design thing to support your API governance rollout, and that's going well. And along the line, the CoE gets dismantled. Okay.
Mhm.
Tell us that story. Why? What was the driver to make that happen?
Well, yeah, I mean, essentially, some of these organizations, they start with, oh, we have a new digital transformation, or we have a new initiative. We're going to the cloud. We're going from on-prem to the cloud, etc. Fine. And then it's just a general change of direction. Unfortunately, and depends on the culture, depends on the people involved. Sometimes you don't take what you've learned and say, because, oh, this is a new transformation, we're doing this thing's way, new and shiny, and then you don't take what we've been doing already, and so that gets, basically, for the most part, gets thrown away, all that learning,
Mm.
unfortunately, and say, okay, we have a new initiative, these are a new set of guidelines, these are all these great ideas, and off you go. Usually, from my experience, and the sort of the standards, just at least from the API perspective, weren't really followers at that point. Is like, it got split up, and everyone's, pizza teams, squads, and everyone's doing their own thing as far as APIs. Right? I mean, there are
Yeah.
other layers, there are other concerns, but as far as I could see, it just sort of fell apart. And like, okay, it was just kind of unfortunate, but it's just one of
Yeah.
those things that happen, that it just happens.
So yeah, so we have this new initiative comes in, some new initiative, whatever that is, and so there's less emphasis on the API program and on that on API governance and the API CoE or C of E, and your center of excellence gets dismantled. Do you see? Because one of the things I think I mentioned to you, like in our previous discussion, is how, first of all, the reason of that being because of a perception, perhaps, that the center of excellence is like, this governance body that's always saying no, always maybe being a blocker
Yeah.
to processes. Is that something you've seen that can contribute to either the C of E, either not getting removed, but maybe slimmed down or something like that? So, what are the patterns around C of E not done right, or where it
Yeah.
can um, be a blocker, really?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, couple of things,
And
like, for example,
sorry, just as you answer that, if you also touch on the, should I say, political
yes.
aspects of that
Yeah.
perception as well? Yeah.
Well, I mean, because, say, for example, to answer your question, that, like, depending on your industry and how heavily regulated you are, or how sensitive you are to any downtimes, any issues. So, for example, change management has a lot of teeth. There's a lot of, if something goes wrong, it's all eyes are on it. So it's a much harder gate. It's got more support, right? So
Yeah.
if you're operationally sensitive, that it sees a lot of attention, right? And it could be slow. It doesn't matter, but it's there, right? It's a tough one to get past. Then also, likewise, security. It's the same thing. With something happens in security, then you have branding issues, reputation, etc. So all eyes on it, and it gets a lot of attention. But when your API, when AI is not, some design choices are not maybe the best choices, and the evolvability aspect comes into the picture later on. It'll bubble up. It'll make itself present. By the way, when you're getting into AI, but that's another. We'll get
Yeah.
into that later. But then you go, okay, that's fine. You have an initial deport, integration pain, etc. But once you get past that, hey, that's fine. We have got past that. The project's good. We're making money now. The initiative is we're measured on something else, on the revenue, etc., etc. And so it doesn't. It's fine. It's like, this is the sort of part of the pain that we can deal with that. It's sort of, politically speaking, it's an easy concern to pick, to look at it and say, okay, we don't I don't think we need this, or we're not ready, or y- maybe we should implement more effort, like what you mentioned in your book, like with API ops, for example. Now API ops plus AI, give it more time, give it a chance to be more of a native experience, but it doesn't happen. It's just say we have to move on, and so that goes for the most part, it just
Yeah.
goes out the door. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, I've seen that's the pattern that I see, that you've got, change management, and again, depends on your industry. So, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know what Miguel, I really want to talk to people at Stripe. Different
Hmm.
companies I've worked with, Stripe was always the kind of like, the example of how to do APIs. And because, not just because they do good APIs, but because they do it consistently well.
Yeah.
Not just good APIs, but really pushing the boundary of what good should be and what good to expect. Because one of the things I find, I was talking about this to someone yesterday, is that like API governance is really, apart from the security aspect, which is a big part of of API
Yeah.
governance, right? You can really make a case for the security aspects of API governance, right? Nobody wants a breach.
Right.
Unfortunately, some companies, they only look at API governance when there's been a data
Yep.
breach, there's been a security issue, then everyone is into that kind of API security. But all the other stuff around, lifecycle management and inventory of your APIs and, deprecation of APIs and standards and things like that, it doesn't always seem as urgent. It doesn't
Yep.
always seem as compelling. And so a lot of the thing about API governance is how to tell the story of how to really make the case of why investment needs to go into making,
Yep.
APIs consistent, making APIs easy to use for humans, for agents, making them discoverable and all that good stuff. And it's not always easy to make, or should I say, it takes an effort to make that case and to make it
Sure.
clearly, with the clarity that makes it attract the investment that.
Sure. I mean, to your point, I mean, how many C levels or higher ups of folk are looking at a catalog? Do they even know it exists? I mean, do they? That's why those concerns that you're talking about are hard to explain, because they don't even look at these things.
Yeah,
Maybe an engineering
yeah,
manager, because he's closer to the team, and maybe they own an API, or let's just say they own a product that consumes a lot of API. Fine, but the driver is there. But other than that, higher up, they just don't. They don't they don't know. They don't realize you have an API sprawl when it's too late. Zombie APIs, shadow APIs, that stuff is just, it's not on their radar. No. And they want, by the way, and
yeah,
they want, it's funny, not in the radar, but then sometimes they mention, well, I want tooling that will let me see this. So okay, that's great.
yeah,
So, but usually, like, to your point, they're not really not concerned. I mean, or
yeah,
not aware.
yeah,
Let's just
yeah.
say not aware.
And so kind of, in your story, so this API Center of Excellence gets practically, let's say, removed. But the model that the company wants to move to is, say, instead of having the central body, let's make this self-service, let every team
Yeah,
do the self-service. Now, self-service is good, right? Center of Excellence really is there to enable self-service, right? Because
exactly.
centrally doing governance doesn't scale, but enabling other teams scales.
Yeah,
But then can we enable teams so much that they absolutely do not need any central oversight? Let's get rid of the central and everything is self-service. How have you seen that go? Because that's almost like a fully federated model. No need for any central kind of
right.
oversight or standards. Everything can happen in teams. So tell us the story of what you've seen when COEs have been jettisoned and everyone is just trying to do things in feature teams.
Well, the first thing that I see a lot of pain, a lot of stress. This whole shift left, shift left, shift left. Okay. And what I saw was a lot of these small teams who now have to own a lot of responsibility on their plate, a lot of stuff that they have to own it. That is just massive amounts of stress that they have to go through. It's just almost inevitable, right? And so what I did was try to continue. I had other responsibilities, but continue to help. I know I care, right? So I'm just trying to continue to help as much as possible. But yeah, to your point, yeah, it's just a lot of cognitive stress. Oh, infrastructure, yeah, go ahead and handle it. You're doing infrastructure, you're doing this, do that, the other, and in all of those aspects, governance is in there. It's just not. I mean, again, depends on the organization. It's not weaved into those into the tooling. It's not weaved, like I mentioned to you in my survey, the compiler, right? It's a developer doesn't
Yeah.
think about it. Say, okay, here's the version, I'm using it, I'm coding, and it's doing this work. It's translating bytecode, blah blah blah, etc. It's doing that, so there's no friction there. It's just a part of the tooling, so that opportunity doesn't present itself, at least not soon enough. And so the developer, that team has to absorb a lot. Even when you're, remember in the early days, governance, what did it look like? You had a document with a checklist and a human walking around, human engaging, and then it went faster when you now apply code, right? Infrastructure as code and whatever as code. And that's an awesome opportunity to have government just get in there, right? Codify that as well, right? And so, but that, I don't think it's happening fast enough. At least in my example, we just have to go, 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 and the team has to own everything, everything, everything. And so it's just pretty tough for those
Yeah.
folks.
Yeah. And I think again when we were talking in kind of my survey, you were talking about embedding gateway config enforcement. For the things for the controls you embedded in the gateway or in the CI/CD pipeline. That even though a team isn't there, that lives longer, right? So the goal really is to embed as much as you can in the automation,
Yep.
right? To make sure that you have all that consistency built in. But yeah, it's good to know what happens when that doesn't happen, when we're not um, building. But that also starts bringing us, and when we start talking about automation that way, bringing us to our favorite topic of everyone is AI. And seeing how do you see it? When I talk to a lot of people now, a lot of people or teams I talk to are focusing on making sure that their APIs are AI ready. And some would argue that's just good. That's just good API design and API governance practices anyway. So there's nothing perhaps too different with making them AI ready, but some would see differently. So what do you see in terms of how not just so on one side the consumptions of APIs, whether that's through APIs or we're providing MCP servers for consumption for agents, but also on the build and governance side, right? How AI is helping on lots of both in building out the APIs, designing the APIs, and then governing the APIs. What's your thoughts on that?
Like you probably suspect, it's faster now.
Yeah.
It's much faster now. You have to, in a way, you got to fight fire with fire, right? You have to. That's why I've been thinking about, okay, and I'm not the only one, but I'm thinking about, okay, how do you, I think to me the key is, of course, like, API out plus AI, get it embedded. Don't even it's built in. Don't even, you have to think about it too much. Of course, with the right balance of human in the loop. You always have to. I think, at least for now, at least in my opinion, you still have to have that. Putting together, like for example, I'm putting together a skill, and I said to myself, I'll say, okay, maybe I can pick. I'm a big fan of the API ops cycles, like the methodology. So I built a skill out of that, and then below that, you have references to OSAPI top 10, also different best practices, etc. And then eventually you might have reference your company style guide. I mean, but you have to, of course, codify that, or at least maybe turn it into some sort of markdown file with the right semantics, right? And so being able to do that, and then embed that, okay, if they're using AI, maybe using like a Claude skill or something along those lines, where you can even throw it in your pipeline as well, as you have building more, your pipelines are more agentic, for example. So it's basically, I'm sort of experimenting with that idea, and again, I probably am not the only one. You probably heard of other folks are probably doing something similar, basically along those lines, so that as you're working, the agents are picking up, they're sort of determining that your methodology or your approach is drifting, right? And as right there on the spot, not maybe after the fact or anything. In other words, across across the life cycle. So that's where the design, the thought process should be to say, okay, here's a skill that should apply. When do we trigger that? What are the hooks, right? What are the events throughout the API lifecycle? Whether you're ideation all the way to, and if you're fortunate enough, all the way, if you've been part of the same API until it gets deprecated and sunsetted, what does that happen? And, so that's more or less
Yeah.
what I'm thinking. So I've got, I mean, I haven't get a repo I
Yeah.
could share with what I have so far, and I still need to test it, but yeah. So something along those lines, because it's just
Yeah.
going faster and faster. And of course, as you know, again, the lack of context is very important.
Mm.
I think governance is so, I'm not sure if this is like a golden age of governance, but at least these agents, right? The context is very important. The ambiguity, you have to be very, very explicit as much as possible. When the human was reinterpreting your instructions and your steps and your poor documentation, making it, now the agent won't do that, right? It'll try to, as hard as it can, to please you to do the right thing,
Yeah.
and that could lead to bad things. So you really, I'm sorry, developers, API AI people, but you're really going to have to put more thought into how you describe those APIs and the right
Yeah.
balance, etc.
Absolutely, and lots of people are using that. I've talked to people who are using that. The drive to be AI ready, if you like, in enterprise, to make sure that the
Yeah,
documentation is good, right?
yeah,
All those hygiene things are there. The API documentation is good, because if that thing is really poor, then
yeah,
that's gonna hamper the
yep,
vision of that agentic consumption. If I just step back a bit to the kind of looking at the operating model again, the people side of this,
hmm,
imagine you have a head of platforms or kind of enterprise architect or someone like that who says, look, we do want to set up a center of excellence, right? We want to set up some API governance group. What are the, two, three things you would ask them you want it to be top of mind for them in setting up this group? What are the top two, three things you'll tell them across
hmm,
everything, across the people, the processes, and the
yep.
technology that they're using it? What are the gotchas they need to watch out for?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that's really, yeah, it's awesome. I would say, um, if I was to start again and then walk into an organization and said, okay, of course you have to take stock of where you are, obviously, but I would definitely look into API ops, obviously, and then apply it to just automate, maybe not automate, but just, I'm not sure, I know people get really hung up on automation, what's automated or not, but let AI assist you in some of the simpler tasks when it
Yeah,
comes to whatever, all the concerns of when it comes to API ops. Well, so definitely invest into that, right? And then one problem that I know I have, and from time to time, is the ROI. Be able to the ROI loop, so to speak, right? Be able to have that team or those champions be able to explain that return on investment on APIs, and very, very succinctly, like the ops metrics, the onboarding, the business capabilities, all things that really matter, because then that forces you to have, say, better conversations with C levels, right? The GMs, right?
yeah,
The folks who basically who are driving or supporting these initiatives. Like this, like I barely had opportunities to actually have that kind of talk. They say, okay, how are APIs are consumed in our organization? Be able to explain that. That alone it can be a difficult conversation. So be able to be ready to have to do that, or at least if you're, say, in the center of excellence, be able to educate, let's say, the other teams, the other folks across the organization on aspects of ROI and then what is it that you're doing. And because of that point, now don't just go crazy. "Oh, let's do AI," right? Everyone's rushing to do that. Great. That's fine. That's fun. But don't forget, the experience that you have. Don't forget the ROIs. Don't forget the APIs, because it's APIs all the way down, right? I
yeah,
think I've heard of that phrase before with some folks in the community. So just don't throw away what you've done, in building interfaces and past digital transformations. You went from SOAP to REST, or combination REST to GraphQL, etc. Just keep that in mind, and you have to, right? Because if you want to claim that you're your APIs are going to be ready for, you have to go back and definitely take a closer look. So that's what I would do, because that, especially that ORI conversation, just to say, this is what we're doing. This is where we're going next. ROI is this, ROI is that, and keep going, keep going. By the way, we're investing in API ops and AI, of course. And basically those two, and everything else should be able to sort of trickle down from there.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
That's definitely a powerful argument to support that investment. And
Yep.
another thing I know you've also, in fact, you just talked about as well. You hinted at training, right? Like being able
Hmm.
to train, support that enablement, if you like, as well involves training. And yeah, how do you see that again? How important is that in terms of embedding governance in the organization, or embedding this to say, look, this is how we build APIs in this organization, right? Because I've
Yeah.
seen organizations who have that. They offer that API specific training for new engineers to say,
Hmm.
no, and this is not just generic, this is how to build a REST API, but
Right.
this
Right.
is these resources. This is how we build our APIs. These are the resources. This is where you find our inventory. This is da, 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 is that kind of, yeah, what do you think about that? That kind of,
Yeah, that's great. I mean, exactly. So that's one of the reasons, like, when I joined Postman, as a technical trainer, I said, okay, this is an opportunity to talk to a lot of customers about those concerns, even though you're talking about the platform and how to do certain things, but I go, by the way, this is what you were thinking about, maybe what you were not thinking about, discovery, etc. This is how you use with the platform. So yeah, education is a big, 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 big deal. And like I said, I've met a lot of developers over the years, and they sometimes, well, what do you the nuances of API design and these? Well, how do you make this API bubbleable? It just doesn't. It doesn't. I think they kind of get it, but they don't actually put it into practice. So that has to be really a continuing effort.
mm,
To be honest, I mean, and I think it goes beyond, like, okay, you take a course, you watch a couple videos, and then it stops. And then, like, okay, then you're back to the day-to-day grind of building APIs and as fast as possible. And so it should be more like I said, the embedding piece, make it sort of sort of assist that developer now that they want to, say, building skills, for example, here's a governance, these are the set of ideas, build it into agentic workflows, whichever those may be, make them part of that, not necessarily hand them off. Of course, you can always consult with maybe more experts, etc., maybe people like yourself, etc., but at least get them into that mindset, right? And that's really the challenge, really the hard part. I mean, especially like you meet a lot of folks, especially in new projects. They hire a bunch of developers, and I just do UPIs in company A, and I came from company B, and I came from company C. They all have their different strategies and mindsets, et cetera, which is fine to a certain extent, but that is really fragmented. So they have to have that conversation, or even people to facilitate it. That's I mean, that's definitely important. I think basically to be able to facilitate, okay, why do we need APIs? The design, the developability, all those things, and
yeah,
ongoing. I mean, and ongoing.
yeah. Well, that's really good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Miguel. This has been fascinating
Uh,
speaking with you. And thank you so much. If people wanted to find out more about you, kind of maybe connect with you, find out more about you, what you do, where can they find out more?
email's fine. Magemaker at gmail.com. Where's what? I don't hang around much in Slack. Maybe
Linked.
in the in LinkedIn, of course. Yeah. Maybe in the OpenAPI Slack channel. Sometimes I can hang around there, try to answer a few questions here.
Cool. All right. I'm sure I will bump into you again somewhere very soon.
Yes.
But thank you so much for being on the show. Really enjoyed
Yeah.
chatting with you, Miguel. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure and great conversation, and I love your questions. Yeah, again, very honored to spend some time with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.